Hay un nuevo libro en español que se llama No eres tú, son ellos. Una guía para librarte de tus papás tóxicos, y es de uno de nuestros especialistas y es un inglés de nombre Josh Connolly, que es un coach de resiliencia y salud mental del Reino Unido y aparece en televisión en Inglaterra y es un experto en ayudar a la gente a superar el trauma de padres tóxicos, y es mi querido amigo, que es un nuevo libro que ya está en español y no puedo creer la emoción. So tell us the story of how this came about. And I want to believe that we had a little bit to do with that. And because of the amazing following that you have in Latin America, especially in Mexico, this book will always be a success.
Yeah, look, I definitely pushed for the Spanish version as a result of all of the friends over there in Mexico through this, right? Through our conversations.
Exactly.
A Mexican following now that I have certainly notice it and see it online. So yeah, I'm very grateful to you. Yeah.
Like, do you even know how to say the title in Spanish? Say it.
I I've not rehearsed it. No eres tú, son ellos.
And then the second part?
Oh, una guía para librarte de tus padres tóxicos.
Lovely, dear.
Una guía para librarte de tus padres tóxicos.
So where does this book come from, and who needs to read this book?
I'll answer the second bit first. Anybody that's grown up with any kind of dysfunction, that has any kind of inkling that their upbringing was not normal, this book is going to be useful for. And it comes through my own journey. So the book will take you on a journey. It's going to help you to understand exactly what it means to have grown up with a
Functional family, including mine. And so we have, I think, there's like three categories, and you correct me. Is there one category where your family is dysfunctional, another category where your family is functionally dysfunctional, and then a third category where it is like a full-blown toxic family, or is there toxicity present in any dysfunctional family? So there you go. That's the riddle for today.
Yeah, well, it's a good riddle. I think your three categories are about right if we're going to categorize them. I would agree with your last point that I believe that we all have toxic behaviors. We all have a level of toxicity in us. I prefer to look at a sliding scale, but if you go to the, let's call it the red end of that toxic scale, yeah, there are people that I would define as toxic people who will likely never change and who will give you absolutely nothing in terms of adding to the relationship. And when you're at that top end of that toxicity, it's really, really difficult. It has a deep impact on you.
Okay, so why don't you describe the toxicity scale? Like, what does it look like? And what does like sort of yellow look like? And what is like the most common behavioral traits of the most toxic family member? And maybe like a milder toxicity?
Yeah, okay, good. So if we say that we all have a level of toxicity in us, right? We all exert toxic behaviors. The red end, and the key thing that you will understand of a seriously toxic person, is they will never, ever accept any accountability or responsibility for their part in anything. Whenever they are nice, there is a sense that it will be weaponized against you in the future. So that's the red end. The key thing is two things: consistency and no accountability, right? If you want to come down to, let's break it into three in the way that you did, the more yellow zone, you've got somebody who is regularly doing things that confuse you and that you might describe as harm you emotionally. However, they regularly accept accountability and try to give you some support in finding their part in it. I would argue we all sit somewhere in that zone normally. And then if you want to go to a much lighter zone, that is somebody who is very accountable, who really changes their actions regularly to try and meet you where you're at, and is very good at seeing you and holding you in your emotions. That's very difficult to do consistently, which is why I think we all mess up and we sit somewhere in the middle. But the difference between the middle, that yellow zone, and the red zone is huge.
Sure. Okay, you've talked about this a lot, and I think that this is especially true in Latin America, certainly in Mexico, where we dote on mothers and dote on fathers, and the mother and the father figure are like almost saintly and godly, where you have to adore them, accept them just the way they are, deal with whatever toxicity they bring to you, deal with how they hurt you because they're like semi-saints. And so children find themselves in this conundrum of not knowing what to do with very toxic relationships and feeling that the only solution they have is to fucking deal with it.
Yeah, what that is that. And what you're talking about, by the way, is power dynamics. So when you hand somebody that much power, right, you create a breeding ground for potential abuse. Because what abuse needs, we often, if we think of like how abuse might happen, we have a tendency to think that it's like a stranger that attacks somebody, right? That's what we think of abuse. But what we're actually talking about is emotional abuse. And for me to emotionally abuse somebody, I need two things. I need one, you to trust me. And two, I need to have a level of power over you. And so there is no more obvious time where that is handed to somebody than when they're a parent. So it makes abuse a breeding ground for abuse, right? So it's exactly where abuse will happen when you create those dynamics. And that's the issue.
Okay, so one thing that I know you talk about in the book is like demystifying the sacredness of family, which I think that it is something very difficult and a heavy weight that all of us in Latin America carry all the time. So how do you demystify the sacredness of the institution of family?
Well, look, there's a couple of things that I would say. The first thing is that if you want sacred family, you can build family, right? Nobody has a given right to be a family member. So you can create your own family. I can build mothering and fathering figures into my life. The second thing I would say is if there is any kind of sacredness within a family, it is born out of the responsibility that is taken by the parent. So the biggest responsibility that you shoulder the moment you become a parent is that your child will see you as a saint-like figure when you're born. And they will see you in a saint, and they will hold you up in that high regard. And so the responsibility lies entirely with the parent, entirely with the parent. And the weight of that power dynamic should fall entirely with the parent. And yet, the mistake that we make is the clear one. We lay the responsibility with the child. And we say it is down to the child to constantly and consistently abandon themselves rather than allowing the parent the responsibility, which, by the way, is what makes having a child sacred, is that you are taking that responsibility. And when you don't, it is dysfunctionally abusive.
Oh my God. So I even think that like physiologically something happens in our brain where it is like very hard for a child to even think that whatever behavior or attitude your parents have towards you could possibly not be right, because we grew up, you know, the first whatever years thinking that this is like my demigod or my goddess, almost perfect. So whatever he does or she does is right. Even in our heart as a child, there's something that doesn't feel good. You know what I'm saying? So it's like this disconnect, this mental disconnect where it's almost impossible to grasp the idea that this mother or this father is not doing something right by me.
Mm-hmm. And so the story that you create as a child is that the problem must be me. That's why the book is about.
Oh my God, say that again. Say that again.
Because as a child, your only option is to decide that the problem must be me. And let me just explain this quickly, because you've touched on something really important. Okay, when we're born, we are wired for attachment to our parents. If you think of a baby when it's born, it wouldn't survive a day in the wild if it didn't attach to its parents. So biologically, we are wired for attachment to our parents, okay? So in those initial years, they are like that godlike figure, like you say. That when, if you feel in your heart, like you said, that your body gets a sense that my parent doesn't love me, it's not safe for you to make the decision that they don't love you. The only safe option as a child that relies entirely on your parent, the only safe option that you have any control over is to make yourself the problem. If I could just be better looking, more healthy, more funny, if I could do better at school, maybe I'd have some control and maybe they wouldn't treat me the way that they do. And so instead of developing a sense of self based on who you are under the loving gaze of a parent, you begin to shape who you are around the needs of your parent. So of course you grow up abandoning yourself to make sure that everybody else is okay. Of course you push down any of your needs that feel a little bit uncomfortable to try and communicate to people. It's exactly how you survived when you were a child, and that you carry that into your adulthood, which is exactly why the book spends 3 chapters talking about what we're talking about, toxic parents. And then the rest of the book is, how do I come home to myself, to who I was really supposed to be and always was before I became what the conditional love forced me to be.
So, let's talk about toxic parents. In Mexico, we are taught to respect our family and parents, and it is very difficult to break that relationships. And let me put an example. If one mom is like super toxic and you love her because you understand that she has had like a really difficult childhood and life, and every time you think about keeping your distance from her, you are very scared of losing her and live the rest of your life feeling super guilty. So how would you explain this and give me the example?
Look, I would say that the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that you can hold 2 opposing truths. Okay. So you can feel a sense that you need to be away from somebody that you love dearly. What I would also say is that boundaries don't have to be fixed and rigid for your entire life. On a daily basis, ask yourself what is best for me and my well-being today, and then do that and make a new decision tomorrow. I think sometimes we get lost thinking about a plan when actually we need to do what's right for us today in the moment. And we can detach with love today. And it's not a reflection of necessarily a lack of love. It actually comes from a place of love in many cases.
You know, sometimes it's like really hard to grasp what we're talking about because it is very controversial, because it is brutal, because it is painful, and, you know, very cruel to have to accept that the 2 people that you love the most can be toxic and could have affected you to the point, you know, of having such trauma and becoming the adult you are today. And there's even like in the commandments in the Bible that they say you will respect your mother and father no matter what. And they just forgot to put the rest of the story. But even if this is not a reality for some people listening to this conversation, like I remember a girl wrote on Twitter the other day that she was like abused by her father all her childhood. Her mom was always mad at her and she would not talk to her for like 3 days straight. And with this conversation, all the memories and the feelings and the hurt are resurfacing. So this is the reality for many people out there. And this is actually the mission of this book, Josh.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, look, I think it's incredible to have such strong family values, like it sounds like a lot of people do in Mexico, right? I love family values and they're great. And this is why, this is what this is all about. We're talking about breaking generational trauma here. And the comment that you had originally there that said that they still feel love and guilt because they can understand why their parents were like they are. There's a second part to that. They're like they are because what they experienced when they were younger, and they never did anything about it. So the best thing that you can do for yourself now and for future generations, should you go on to have your own children, is to break the generational trauma now. That's the best for you, the best for your children, and ultimately, in the long run, the best for your parents and their parents and their parents' parents, because the buck gets to stop with you. And that's why I say pain will travel down through generations until somebody's willing to not only feel it, but deal with it. So if you do what you need to do today, you are the one that is bringing families together, not tearing them apart. That's important to understand.
Josh, my dear, a big kiss to you. And I hope this book is very successful in Mexico and Latin America and all Spanish-speaking countries. I send you a big kiss. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for playing a big part in that success too.